Hey, welcome back to NZIT. Today I'm going to be going over a common question that Salesforce administrators get um, throughout their entire jobs, both in setting up organizations and in managing them. Um, Someone will often ask, can you set person X's role to system administrator so they can see everything? The answer, 99% of the time, to this question is no. Unless they're actually going to be administrating Salesforce, there's no reason for them to have full administrator access. But that also doesn't get to the root of the problem, in that when someone is saying this, they're saying that X person is lacking the access that they need to do their job. So how do you get them the appropriate level of access while not giving them the full administrator privileges? In this video, I'm going to go through a scenario and show you how I would solve it. So, starting from the top, Joe is the Chief Marketing Officer of Marigold Metals. He's the sponsor of the Salesforce implementation project. Joe asks, can you set Dwayne, my Director of US Sales, as Salesforce Administrator so that he can see everything? Now, the problem with this is that Dwayne should not have access to international sales, parts of the service setup that are outside of his country, or especially a set of custom objects built for recruiters to manage applicant information. Salesforce administration is also controlled by the CIO and the IT division of the corporation, not Joe, so assigning administrator privileges to someone who's outside that IT administration part of the organization is not under Joe's jurisdiction. So, to answer Joe's question, I would start by communicating to him that a Salesforce administrator would give Dwayne too much access and too much control. As an example, I would show him how Dwayne could access the custom objects used by HR. Instead, I could work with Dwayne directly to see what level of access he needs and expand that as needed depending on what he says. So the next steps would be to set up that conversation with Dwayne, and before that, to prepare by reviewing his current levels of access. So there's two types of access in Salesforce, basically. There's everything else, and then there's record level access. For user settings, app permissions, object permissions, and most everything else, you'll need to review the user profile and the permission sets assigned to a user. So if you don't know the difference between user profiles and permissions, Salesforce has this nice chart here that basically shows what it is. Profiles are assigned one per user, which is important, and they control the base level of user access. An example of a user profile would be like marketing user, or like customer service team member, or something along those lines that denotes overall user access. And this is generally tied to whatever role, or I should use role lightly. It's close to whatever role they have in the company, but not Salesforce role necessarily. And then permission sets are used to augment the access that's given by profiles. So a permission set can be used to expand the access that's given by the profile by adding additional levels of access to app permissions, record types, tab settings, assigned apps, object permissions, field level security, Apex classes, and Visual Force pages. So you can see that there are some limits to what permission sets can add access to. Page layouts, IP ranges, login hours, desktop, client access are all controlled exclusively by profiles, but permission sets can be used to expand profile access on these other fronts. Now, for the second part, for records, you need to look at this pyramid here, beginning with organization-wide defaults, role hierarchy, sharing rules, and then manual sharing. So organization-wide defaults will tell you organizationally how visible the records are. This is the absolute base level of the organization. Depending on how you have this set up, people may be able to view nearly all records to start out with, or they may be totally restricted in the records that they view. That's why it's important to look at first. Then you're going to want to look at the role hierarchy. And the role hierarchy can be viewed by going to the roles on the team, or the roles and setup. And the role hierarchy is going to tell you who is under Joe, and secondly, well, first of all, it's going to tell you if role hierarchy based sharing is enabled. But assuming that it is for all the objects, you're then going to want to see who is under Dwayne on the hierarchy, and determine which records he can see based on that hierarchy. So with hierarchy-based sharing, you can see anyone who's a direct report to one of your direct reports in a chain all the way up to you. You can't see people who are on the same level. You can't see other people's direct reports, and you can't see anyone who's above you in the hierarchy. But to augment the hierarchy settings, you can use sharing rules to give people more access. So that's the next thing you're going to want to look at, to see if there are any sharing rules that have expanded Dwayne's access to other areas of the organization. Record those, and then take a look at whether or not these rules give Dwayne the level of access that he needs. And then manual sharing, I recommend not taking a look at that yet, but the sharing rules and role hierarchy are more important at this stage. Looking at any manual sharing might be a little bit cumbersome. After you've reviewed these, you can then schedule your meeting with Dwayne to show him what he currently does and does not have access to. Now, this obviously isn't going to be an exact science from either of you. Dwayne's not going to fully understand what he needs access to in the moment. You're not going to fully understand what all Dwayne has access to, but by bringing your best guesses to each other, you can get a pretty good sense of what's missing, especially from a high level in organizational setup. So you guys have the meeting, and at this point, Dwayne says he is missing a key level of access in his current profile. First of all, he's lacking access to the appropriate service records for U.S. accounts, since they were not granted access through the hierarchy. The service representatives are not under the Chief Marketing Officer. Now, second, he needs access to certain components of the HR object, specifically limited to candidates for the US-based sales team. But he does not need access to the other elements of the HR object. So, first of all, to solve one, I would start by giving him this CRM user default permission set, then create a sharing rule which could share service records for US-based customers. So, to set this up, going into our Salesforce org, I would go to, we're in Setup, go to Public Groups, and then create a new public group. Here I've created a public group for US-based sales representatives, and this public group is going to help us to denote the case sharing rules for Dwayne. So next you're going to want to go to Service Setup to set up those case sharing rules. Go to Sharing Settings, then go down to case sharing settings. And as you can see here, I've created a case sharing rule. Edit. US case sharing, US sales case sharing, description, US based sales representatives, case access read only. Oops. Save that. And that US based sales group includes all of the US based service representatives. And the case sharing rule and the case sharing rule will be used to share cases throughout that group. So then you want to go to sharing settings and add a case sharing rule to share. US service cases from the public group, US based sales representatives, which includes US service reps, with the VP of North American Sales, who's the role in question. Case access set to read only because he doesn't need to edit the cases, he just needs to look at them. Save that. So now he'll have access to all of the service cases in the US based public group. Now to solve the second requirement, he needs access to the HR object, but only limited to candidates from the US sales team. you're going to want to go to Setup, leave the service organization, go to Setup on the regular organization, Security, and then down to Sharing Settings. I guess I should have searched Sharing Settings. Security, Sharing Settings. Then down to the Candidate Sharing rule. Candidate being the custom object. That was created for HR. Then you're going to want to create a new candidate sharing rule. As you can see here, I've already created this one. And it reads as follows. U.S. Director of Sales, candidate sharing rule. The business unit equals U.S. Sales. Business unit is a custom field that was added to the candidate sharing object, and business unit has all of the different international units. There's US based sales, Canadian sales, etc. So pick US sales, give him read-only access because he doesn't need to make any edits again, he just needs visibility into it. Save the sharing. Oh, and it's shared with VP of North American Sales. But save the sharing. Now it's shared. So now we've addressed both criteria. He has access to both the appropriate service records for US-based accounts and the fields and the records on the HR object that he needs. After establishing this, it's important to follow up with the user and make sure they are well supported. Follow up in a few weeks to see if they've run into any major issues. In all likelihood, you were missing some requirements and will need to add them. And then finally, you need to make sure to send feedback to the Chief Marketing Officer and let him know that you've worked with the U.S. Sales Director to improve his access. Since he made the initial request, you need to make sure to give him confirmation and tell him that work is ongoing on this. So that's all for this case. I hope this helped everyone understand a little bit better how to answer a question like, can you set person X's role to system administrator so they can see everything? Open-ended questions like this are tough to answer, but again, I hope that this information helped.